All right, Rick and Rob, welcome back. We're picking back up for listeners. We did a first episode a couple weeks ago about leadership and shadow work and what is integral leadership and what is shadow work and why is this important in the context of leadership. So today we're going to go through, Rick, you've had an experience of actually designing a journey or an immersion program for a leader that was focused on shadow. And it sounds like it was a really rich experience. So today, the three of us are just going to harvest that together of what was it that you created? What was the design? What was the outcome? What led the leader to want this? And then see what we can learn together. So I thought what we would do is just begin with, let's share just a brief definition. We can all brainstorm this, but what do we perceive shadow to be, particularly in the leadership context?
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll dive right in. So does anyone want to kick that off?
Rob, you want to get started?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we played with this a little bit last time. I think one definition that has always made sense for me is the any psycho-emotional material that has been sort of cast out of the self. It's been externalized. And that might be something negative that someone doesn't want to be, or that may be something positive that they have a hard time seeing themselves as. But that's one way to think about shadow. What is it for you, Rixt, or what were you imagining when this leader approached you?
Yeah, so I totally get what you say, Rob. It's something that you don't identify with. So whether that is a competency or that is a character trait, so which you feel like is so not you. And so last time we talked about this, like Jung's definition is the opposite choice of the choice we make, right? And we had a whole conversation also about that. When we look at leadership, I think it's about becoming the servant for the whole. So using leadership not so much to kind of advocate your vision and purpose, but more around, holding polarities in this complexity that we live in, and being able to steward whatever the organization towards, whole welfare for all involved, for all stakeholders. So I guess reactive what we talk about then in leadership circle is the competent manager, and then a creative is the visionary leader, and then the next would be the servant leader,
which is the integral part.
Yes.
Yeah.
How about you,
Beautiful.
Anne-Marie? How will you?
I feel alignment with what you both said, and the only thing that I would add is it seems to me that it's probably the most vulnerable thing about being a leader, actually about being a human, is that we have shadow. We have places that we don't actually see, of ways that we view the world, ways that we operate, ways that we perceive reality. And there's no way around that. That's just part of the human experience. But it can have impact on the systems that we live in, on ourselves, on our relationships. And so I find it to be the most powerful and the most vulnerable path, because we're basically opening ourselves up to say, ooh, what can't I see? And then what often comes with that is the innocence of these protectors that we have, these parts of self that have, learned to protect us from having vulnerable parts be seen, or having insecurities or fears be seen. And so I think shadow is such deep and profound work, and it takes a lot of courage to do it. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I would add is, Rob, you brought up last time the golden shadow, and I appreciated you bringing that, because I feel that shadow, it can be so easily perceived as like the shortcoming that we have, but it's also, and I see this in myself, it's like the ways in which I don't actually see my own gifts, and there's like a shadow in that too. And I don't know if that's how you would define golden shadow. I think you defined it a little differently last time. So maybe you could just put one more plug on the definition of golden shadow, and then we'll jump right into Rick's exploration.
Sure, yeah. And I love what both of you have said. I think it's a brilliant definition of integral leadership, Rixt. And Ray, I couldn't agree more. Just the nakedness of shadow work takes a ton of courage.
Yeah.
The golden shadow idea, if you've ever experienced yourself, sort of idolizing a teacher and sort of saying, "Oh, I'll never be able to. I could never be that." There's that same kind of mechanism is at play, right? That is not me, and yeah, the shadow sometimes starts to have this. Oh, it must be the dark and ugly things that we're not willing to be that we have to accept, and that's not necessarily the case. There are aspects of self that we've disowned. So
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. All right. So, Rick, maybe what we could do is start with tell us a little bit about what inspired creating a program for a leader to focus on this person's shadow and how you got this started.
Yeah. So it started with a question from the field, right? So it was really like a client saying, what's next? Where can I develop next? That we started to explore. Well, what's stagnant? What's holding you back? And that we realized that would be integral or shadow work. So I worked with this leader before in 2018. And we then did the Leadership Circle 360 instrument, and I did a coaching assignment with him, which was really around courageous authenticity that he wanted to work on. And part of that assignment was a life story. So what I sometimes do is what we also call narrative identity, is to do an interview around his life story where this leader or the coachee shares the story of their life, how they know it. And then and it's a great way to, first of all, get to know your client really well, but also for them to self-understand their patterns and beliefs. And so and it's a great way to build a great relationship with your coachee, because you get this intimate moment together where you really see, the narrative of this person, the dominant narrative. And so I used that again when we met again for the retake. So this was again the 360 done. And we saw that his courageous authenticity increased. So of all the, creative competencies in the model, the courageous authenticity grew the most. And he found in his life story, he found courage from his grandfather onto his mother. And so that just self understanding his own life story helped him to find more courage within. And he used that, and it showed up in the second time around the 360. And so and maybe we should take time now to explain a little bit about the leadership circle. I don't know if that would be helpful.
I was just
thinking out
getting
loud.
that sense. Yes, I think that's a great idea. Let's do that.
Yeah. So, Rob, please, whatever you think is useful, share here. But I'll start. So the leadership circle is a 360 that measures 29 competencies. And so it's you see what we call reactive tendencies and creative competencies. And so the leader gets feedback from everyone around him, the boss, peers, direct reports, and others. And it shows up in different categories. And those the creative and the reactive mindset, as we call it, correlates with stages of development. So Robert Keegan, Harvard professor, is one of the many that writes about stages of development. And so it correlates the reactive mindset correlates with the socialized mind, and the creative mindset correlates with what we call self-authoring. So then all the questionnaires, that the data is put in the database, and so the data is then compared to all the other data in the database. So you get a percentile score. And I don't know how many data or how many leaders went through this. I don't know, Rob, do you know? I think it's around 150,000 or something.
Yeah, I think we're a little higher than that at this stage, but yeah, it's at least that much.
Yeah. Anything
That's
else
a
to add
powerful
around that 360 information?
Yeah, I would say that, like you said, Rix, it's built on this what's called the universal model of leadership. So the tool itself, the instrument, is an integration of a number of other different frameworks and philosophies, and it acts as this window, this gateway into these deep developmental conversations. So much of it is about the inner game that's driving the behavior of the leader in their context. One of the other things that's neat about it is it's this character adaptation in context instrument. We're seeing not just who are you as a leader, but according to these stakeholders in your current environment, in your current role, at this stage in your life, how are you impacting others, and how do you imagine you're impacting others? There's a self-assessment component. So the work that we get to do with leaders is to invite them into this moment of recalibration of their world, to see, how do I imagine I'm impacting people with my leadership, and how do they feel I am? And part of where the magic happens is obviously where might there be gaps there, right? And then of course where are there things I know I need to improve, and where are there things that are strong? But it really is an amazing gateway instrument into some of these deep conversations.
Yeah, I would say when I've used it, it's been so powerful in terms of the topic of shadow, right there where you just named it, but the leaders assess themselves, a self-assessment, and then the raters assess them, and then looking at a chart where it's a visual of the difference between one's perception of self and, in the particular context, other people's perception. And there's such rich conversation of what that person's aware of or what they're not aware of, and how to work with that. It's humbling. So yeah, thank you for saying a little bit more about the framework and the tool.
And I want to say I've had the chance to talk with Rixt about how she designed this experience for this leader, and I think there were so many intuitive little hits that you followed. It seems like, Rixt, even in the listening for what to do next, and then the designing and some of the exercise that you. So I'm very excited to explore this a little more again with you today.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for asking those questions, because it actually made me, realize, make more explicit what is it that we've done. And it was really a co-creation between this leader and me. And from the beginning, I was very open to him saying, I have 70 years of experience as a coach, but this is pretty new to me. I think, so the starting point was the retake, where we noticed that his courageous authenticity increased, purposeful and visionary increased, community concern, but it was already 90% in creative. So then it's almost like a system at its max. So then the next step would be to go towards integral. We also saw that his passive went up. So that's a reactive tendency. And his decisiveness decreased. So there was what I thought was, stagnation. He kind of doubled down on passive, becoming more passive, and becoming less decisive of that. To me, that it looked like there was a link. So in our conversation, we explored that, like what's happening there. And that made him curious to say, yeah, there's some anxiety there around making decisions. And so we kind of explored that. And by the end of the conversation, And by the way, also his self-score between the first 360 and the second was way more accurate. So he had a pretty accurate image of himself. Like also he noticed the decisiveness was also going down, right? So when he said, "What's next?" I said, "Well, integrals next, shadow work's next." But I don't know if you feel like you want to go there, because it's not always fun and it can feel uncomfortable. So I just shared a little bit about what that would entail, having done some shadow work myself, having read something about it. But there wasn't much that I could share, except maybe just read chapter 12, I think it is, in what is it, Mastering Leadership, right? And Bob Anderson, Bill Adams, and so I said, just read that chapter, and you'll get a better understanding of what this journey might look like. And so he did. And after a week, he emailed me and said, I read it, and I'm a bit scared, but I'm also curious. And why don't we get started? So that's how it started.
And it strikes me those are two necessary qualities, embarking on that kind of journey. I'm curious and I'm terrified.
So true. Yeah. And just for listeners, I'll put the note in the show notes, the name of this book, but this is part of the Leadership Circle, the book itself. Okay, so he's enrolled, he's curious, he's scared, and he's ready to go. So then you start designing. So tell us a little bit about the process of, and you can, go wherever you want with this, but the design and the process itself and what that looked like.
Yeah, so at first, I did that very intuitively. And I did contact one of my colleagues, Paul Burns, to say, I'm about to embark on this integral leadership coaching assignment, and I feel it needs a different rhythm and structure than a regular coaching engagement. So we had a little chat about, how would that look like? Because it felt that we needed time for what I like to call deep work, and maybe some ongoing conversation. And so Paul just asked me a couple of questions, which helped me to say, okay, let's do maybe 4-month ongoing coaching engagement. And I reserve 3 hours a month for this client. And we take 2 hours a month for, the deeper conversations, where we really dive into maybe family constellation, maybe doing some voice dialogue or, polarity work. And I reserve an hour for maybe just an email or WhatsApp or some ongoing support, because I realize that, he might get triggered in a way at work, or just needing to kind of debrief, this is what happened to me at work and I see things differently now. Or so that was kind of a different rhythm than I would usually use with coaching clients.
I want to jump in real quick and just acknowledge the power of that piece of giving the extra hour where it's not structured, but they know they can reach out and bring anything, that, because it feels like sometimes the waiting until the conversation happens, that stuff just doesn't have anywhere to go and the integration is slower. So I'm appreciating that part of the design and see the power of that. So keep going. I didn't mean to jump in, but
no, thank you for acknowledging that. And he actually said, when we at the end of the assignment, he said that made a difference. That I was available for him, for a call now and then, or WhatsApp. that I was present with him in this journey that sometimes felt confusing, destabilizing, exciting. um, so yeah, I do think that that was really helpful that we integrated that into the design. And I also said, so most of this was done virtual. And I asked him for the deeper work to be at home. And we didn't always talk for 2 hours, but he would take 2 hours to kind of get into that conversation and maybe also kind of check out before diving into, day-to-day business again. So it was mostly on a Friday. He was at home in his home office. So he had this kind of, I don't know, boundaries around this conversation, which I think was also helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that there's something, obviously you did this intuitively, and there's something really intelligent about the design, like choosing to make that kind of space sets the mind up to go into that kind of work, right? It's a magical pre-frame to say, we're going to take this seriously. It needs space and time. We're going deep, don't, make sure there's buffer on either side. It sort of primes the subconscious to be that much more open. Like, we're going. I love that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And I sometimes felt the pressure more so than in other coaching engagement that it needed to go deep, right? In those deeper work sessions that you can't just chat casually. So, but it was, I think, necessary, to create space, to go to a deeper place than you normally go. Yeah.
And for you too, is what I hear, right? Like that not just the expectation of that, but that it may have required a different rhythm from you, a different quality of attention from you. That's interesting.
Yes, and so I think it's interesting as a coach. I found this different because it's almost like you're dropping the change agenda. So it's more about being present, resting, being with what is, whatever comes to the surface, and create self-understanding. So for me, it felt, especially when we were doing those deeper work sessions, it was a movement from a movement towards going inward, really resting within, being with that, kind of creating the how do you say that, the conditions to make that happen. And at the same time, you can't make it happen, right? So you have the intention. You can't force it that it will take place. So that was, I think, as a coach, it requires more just being with the person, being present, listening on a very deep level, and letting go. Really letting go of it needs to take place, or something needs to happen here. This person needs to change. And I think we never do that, but there's something about regular coaching, or the coaching I've done before, which is a movement towards, often from present, or you talk about the presence and the future, and not so much about, of course, history informs the presence, but it's not so much going back to maybe early years, or even talking about childhood. So that felt different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it strikes me when you're talking about it that it's really vulnerable for everyone involved, because as a coach, you really can't have any performative nature of where you're trying to go. It's about creating the space for the intelligence of that person to get revealed without an agenda, and that you don't know what depth will look like. You just know that's the intention, and then you just show up. And that's bravery. Yeah.
And it's beautiful, right? If we think that the nature of shadow is something it's not okay for me to be, if we're going to do shadow work, this kind of loving, welcoming, accepting presence is a logical, necessary ingredient, right? This, you sort of have to create the conditions for whatever to emerge is okay. It's allowed, it's invited, it's here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks. That's a great way of putting it. Just being an anchor, a safeguard, for this person to see the parts of him that he was maybe ignoring or maybe reluctant to see. Um, yeah, so that is an important ingredient.
Yeah.
And so, are there other aspects of the design that you felt like were key kind of milestones in this journey, Rixt? What were a few of those?
Um, Yeah, so another thing that I think was key was his journaling. So he started doing that, it was his own initiative, but he felt it helped him to deal with the confusion that was kind of in the process of dealing with, some of the emotions. Um, and so it helped him to make things more logic, I would say. And he shared some of his notes with me, which then helped me in this ongoing support to then ask him some questions, or we had, conversations by email of what he noticed within himself. And what I consciously did was I felt it needed a rational and a somatic approach. So I consciously created some sessions where, for example, we did a family constellation, um, which helped him to see, the family dynamics that he still carried with him, and how that influenced him to develop a certain way, and with that, his shadow. Um, and so Bessel von Kolk, he wrote The Body Keeps Score, the psychiatrist, and he writes about, he calls it a bottom up and a top down approach. So top down is the rational, right? Understanding your story, understanding shadow in a rational way. And the bottom up is the physical experience or the emotional experience. And he says that for transformation to happen, those two different areas in the brain where we process this need to connect. So, in other words, we need the whole brain to be online when we do this work. And so we did both, right? We did the life story, we did the talking about the shadow, recognizing it from, doing polarity work, or the family constellation, just, knowing the narrative, the story you tell yourselves, naming the shadow. And then there was this somatic experience of feeling it. And so one of the things that I did was we did some work around the younger self, kind of, recognizing the younger self, or the inner child. Because, I think that's when we are this young, this is where the fragmentation happens, right? When we unconsciously decide to protect ourselves, and when the reactive, as we call it, emerges. And we need that as children to survive. And we talked about this last time in our podcast. So because it protects us, it creates, we do this out of loyalty towards our parents and the system that we grow up in. And with that, we lose a part of ourselves, or we store that in a different place. So it lies dormant within us. And so this is a prototype, right? So it's not that this is the way to go, but I felt it's helpful to go to that younger self, to meet this younger self, to feel, yes, that was kind of the moment that I put this in my shadow. And to be compassionate about that younger self and say, yeah, and that's what I needed then. And my parents raised me with good intentions, and yet, as a child, I this is what then fragmented within me. And so, before we become whole again, I think we need to become fragmented, at least understand, oh, that's when the fragmentation happened. So this is what I consciously designed, and I didn't know if that would, kind of take us where I felt it needed to go. But the family constellation and his journaling eventually had him, and he did an inner child meditation, helped him to connect to his younger self, and then also on an emotional level. And I think that was the tipping point within the coaching assignment. So it's not only the rational understanding and the naming the shadow, but it's the somatic or the emotional experience of, yes, that's the feeling that I didn't want to feel for a very long time, and now I'm connecting to that, and I'm experiencing that right now as a grown-up, as an adult, and I understand why my younger self didn't want to feel this.
Seems like there's so much self-compassion inherently built into that process of helping go back to the place where it originated, and seeing how it's manifesting as an adult and as a leader, and being able to link those and see that, oh, there's a reason. It's a very good reason why my behaviors come out this way.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, I just noticed you put your hand on your heart. What came up for you?
I'm struck again by this is true, I think, of any coaching relationship. The coach is leaning in and the client is leaning in with a degree of trust and, openness. And it just the level of that I hear you describing, Rixt, of, where do we need to go next? I don't know. Let's try this. And like just the levels of leaning into each other, I'm really touched by. And then of course I'm so curious to hear you describe when you say tipping point in the engagement. What was it that was noticed? What was it that emerged? And how did that begin perhaps a process of integration?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you both for being touched by this story. I'm touched by it again too, and it so feels like it came through. I mean, it wasn't. It came through the relationship that we had and the moment that we had together. So really, soul to soul connection, and then these moments emerge, which is, what I love about my work. And I think we all do. So your question, yeah. So we did I think 2 times a family constellation. And what I do then is I ask my coachee to give a certain title to the constellation they put out on the screen. So I think he was able to kind of connect that title, which he gave his first family constellation, to the feeling he had as a boy, and how that sometimes still shows up in his current reality, connecting it to the decisiveness So he understood, all of a sudden he saw his own pattern, like, oh yeah, that's when it became really hard for me to make decisions. And I needed to do that in order to be loyal to my family. And it gave me great stuff, right? And I love my parents, and I love myself, and I can see now how that influenced my decision making, and how that is sometimes really hard for me at this stage. Um, we were, I think I asked him a couple of questions around some journaling that he shared with me. And I saw him in that session, I saw him kind of freeze. I don't know exactly what I asked, but all of a sudden it was like he fragmented and froze. It was almost like I felt the screen was stuck, right?
Oh, wow.
And so I called out his name, and it kind of really woke him up. So I think he was really kind of in a flashback. And then I called out his name. He started crying heavily. And I just, held the space. I just asked him to breathe fully. And that's the moment when I really realized it was, we were doing this virtually. And I wish I could just sit next to him, because I would have been better in registering what was happening. But I really think that he was connecting to this fragment on an emotional level, which made him kind of freeze. It's when I think it's what happens, right, with our system. When it's too overwhelming, we can step into this, or we glide into this kind of um, separation of ourselves, which is then shows up in a freeze moment. And I think that was, I've never experienced that before as a coach. And I was really happy with them. I think I brought all the experience and insights into that moment to kind of be with him, to connect with him, and to let him realize that he was in a flashback, brought him back into the session, and he could see what just happened to him. And which was emotional. But that was actually the moment, I think, he integrated his shadow. Um, and that was a start of integral. But, on one hand, you just wish you could, I wish I kind of recorded that session and just look back on it, like, what happened, what did I ask, what then happened, and what then happened. So, but that to me felt like, and to him too, a tipping point of, realizing or integrating the shadow on an emotional level. And he already knew that on a rational level, but then it happened on the emotional.
Yeah. Where the integration that you were speaking of earlier, the top down, bottom up, it feels like that was the tipping point. There was a connection, like a fusion of those two. Beautiful. So I know we're coming close to the end of our time, and I wonder, as you go through the experience and you're talking about it now, is there any other key element that you feel like would be really important to share right now about the process, whether that was part of the design or any other aspect?
Yeah, so I think that key here is, why would you go through this? Why the heck would you all do this? And that's, I think, because, well, first of all, I think we need leaders who come from this place of being able to hold the polarities and to be with ambiguity, to listen to different stakeholders, and to be with maybe the difference of point of view and this unresolvedness in the system, and finding a way to architect or create a system that guides the welfare for all involved. And so last time we talked about the polarities that we see in the world, and I think we need more and more leaders or people really that can be with that ambiguity. And so why would you embark on this journey? Because if you can see the polarity within yourself, so you can see the light and the shadow, then you can see that in other people, and you can steward systems towards the next level. And what this leader noticed for himself now he went through this, is that he calls it detachment and decisiveness. So he feels, so he's a very compassionate person. He's very good at relating to all kinds of people, very visionary, purposeful, really an ideal. I think it was a comment on his 360, an ideal leader for an IT group. So in a way, he's doing great. He's a great person. He's a great leader. But there was something that he felt that was holding him back, which he recognized as in his, decisiveness. And now that he's able to integrate that next to all the other things that he's already capable of, he's now, becoming the system architect, kind of integrating he's asked to integrate two parts of a division and kind of create a new IT group. So reinventing that system. And then you can imagine, people have their opinions about it, and he has to find a way to, to listen to all stakeholders, to listen to all these different points of views, but see where the system needs to go next, and really enjoying doing that. So I think, that would be why would you go through this? Why would you even want to embrace this shadow? Well, it's because you want to steward this system to the next level. That would be.
It reminds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you in one moment, but just it reminds me of a quote that you had brought, Rixt, last time. I don't think we read it out loud, but just this kind of work is what changes the world. Like this kind of work is what helps to create a new world of integration. And so it's beautiful to go into the journey of what you and this leader co-created together. Thank you so much for bringing more. I know there's so much more to harvest here, but Rob, is there anything you want to share as we wrap up here?
I would echo the same. I'm left with this feeling of sort of a deep appreciation for the courage of this leader to say, there's more. There are things I'm not seeing. I want to deepen the journey. I want to continue to. And that's one thing that's really, I think, important about the nature of integration is a process, is a never-ending process. To your point, Anne-Marie, about as a human, there's always something we're not seeing. There's an imperfectness about us that we can explore and actually find freedom in exploring and integrating further. So just a deep appreciation for the leader, their willingness to lean in, deep appreciation for you, Rixt, and the way that you met the leader and created this journey and all of the wisdom and the not knowing that you brought to it. This beautiful combination of energy and structure that you put together. And grateful for this conversation. Like you said, lots more to explore, but this is wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So wonderful. Rixt, any last thoughts from you?
No, just thank you for helping me to put this in words, right? Sometimes the work we do, it's just hard to put in words, like what exactly happened, or So thank you for making that more, helping me to reflect and making it more explicit. And I think I would love to coach more leaders in this shadow work and integral, because it's very fulfilling. It's also terrifying, but and it's beautiful. It's just beautiful to go there, and I think it's needed in organizations across the globe, to be with ambiguity and those polarities, and to come from a third place, right? To see how can we then bring those polarities together and reinvent the system to this next place, next level.
Yeah, beautiful. So for anyone that's listening right now, if you want to know more about Rixt and how she's designed this, you can find her website in the show notes. Rob, you do similar work, so have your information in the show notes. And I know for anyone listening that's part of the Leadership Circle community, you're going to be making some more offerings, so stay tuned for that. And then I'm with you, Rixt. This is my passion as well. And this is what I'm loving doing with leaders and want to be doing more. So any of you listeners that are leaders that are at that place where you feel like, wow, I think I want to go to the next level. I don't even know what that means. Or there's a next step for me. This might be it. So, reach out to any of us if you want to know more. And thank you both again for being here today. And I look forward to more.